Welcome to the final panel on the fractalization of block building. It is a meme as a tribute to Tarun, who is a master of abstraction at memes. That said,
I don't know about that.
We'll see. Why don't we get started? So this is a discussion primarily about block building, but block building means a lot of things in Ethereum, probably more than you think. So hopefully we can share what we see and get on the same page. So why don't we do a quick round of introduction? I'm going to ask everyone to introduce yourself and your project and the role your project plays in the transaction supply chain. If you play multiple roles, please name them. And also, please share one single surprise you have from 2023 in the MEV space you didn't expect last year. So, Tarun?
Hey, Tarun, founder of Gauntlet. Our supply chain usage is we do risk management for a lot of DeFi protocols. So we monitor a lot of mempools and try to understand sort of when particular protocols are more at risk depending on their liquidation mechanisms or other features. One surprising thing. I guess I'm surprised that we haven't had more disclosures of L2 MEV, if there has been some, if there have been sort of malicious sequencers. I kind of was hoping we would have like had a crap rollup, like someone just forks a rollup and then it exists only so that the sequencer extracts. And I'm surprised we haven't seen that performance art yet.
Hey, I'm Anna from Uniswap. And if you look at the MEV supply chain, we're at the very beginning, at the application layer. And our goal is essentially to reduce the MEV surface as much as possible, because we really believe our mission is really to protect users and ensure that by placing an intent on Uniswap, and then also via batching of different transactions together, that we can remove as much MEV as possible before it even hits any further step in the transaction management. And the surprise. Thinking about this, I would say, I mean, the hype that intents become maybe this year. I would say, I mean, we've been working on intents for a few years at this point, and this year it really like sparked up, and I didn't expect it to that extent.
Hi, my name is Howe. I am from Tokka Labs. Right. Our position in the entire supply chain is that we are private market makers, we are searchers, and we are also solvers. Right. And I think the surprising thing this year is same as what Anna mentioned. I think intents, there started to be an explosion of interest, right? So as private market makers, we actually have been doing intents, right, for many years, right? It's just so happened that this year, everybody started realizing that, hey, this is the next big thing. So this is a surprise to me.
Hey everyone, I'm Kubi from Titan. And we are one of the larger block builders on Ethereum. So we are in the middle of the supply chain. And we also recently released a relay, so that's the second role that we are playing. Surprising thing, Telegram bots.
What's surprising about it?
That they exist.
Not their volume?
Yeah. Yeah, so much volume going through them.
Amazing. Well, I guess I'm Tina. There is no alternative, or Tina is not aligned. Depends on the time of the day. From Flashbots, and we are currently operating a builder and a relay, and we are also operating an order flow auction protocol as an experiment. That said, I guess most importantly, we're working on, trying to iterate the MEV game to the next level. So, main job. Anyways, so one surprise. Man, this is a hard question. I thought I had a crystal ball. One surprise that I think this year had been the bike shedding over intense, because I think that it's shockingly polarizing in terms of people's view on it when it is in fact a technical field that people have been working on for a while. So kind of similar. Anyways, so why don't we get into some of the definitions first, so we don't bike shed. I actually just want to ask the audience first, how many of you are familiar with PBS? Please raise your hand. Great, we can go really fast. So I'm gonna call on each of you. Anna, can you define solvers in your own words and how they're different from searchers?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe to explain it at first in simple words, it's like on CowSwap, but also on Balance Fusion and Uniswap X, user intents are collected. And the assumption essentially is that a lot of users are obviously not necessarily professionalized traders, or at least are also not super familiarized with transaction management, or at least no professional parties and such. And we want to enable users to a simple UX where they can essentially just express what they would like to achieve, and then have professional parties that we refer to as the solvers take care of the transaction management for them, because they're much better equipped in doing so, because they know all the ins and outs around MEV, how to protect transactions against it, and so on. And so solvers look at incoming order flow, and then they compete on this order flow. And I think this order flow auction is, depending on the application, is slightly different. On CowSwap, essentially, what happens is that solvers submit a score. You can envision this as the score is higher, the better the execution price for the user. And here, the interesting point is that a solver is winning this auction, this order flow auction, if they maximize the value for the user. And if they do, then they're selected and they can continue and do the transaction management on chain. And the big difference to searchers that I would highlight here is that the order flow auction within the application of CowSwap essentially is maximizing for the value that's attributed to the user, versus if you look at searcher competition, it's usually maximizing for the value that can be extracted, because they compete on being on their bundles being included in the block space.
That is an interesting angle. I was more thinking about from, I see solvers as protocol employees, just like our robotic friends. So like essentially they get they operate under the constraints or confines of the application. Do you agree with this view? Or I do agree with your take though, in terms of like the differentiation between solvers and searchers, but I see it more as the constraints that they're operating under.
Yeah, you mean basically the rules of the competitions, in a sense. Like, what is the framework, what are the rules that they need to follow in order
Yes.
to execute?
Quick question. So would you say a searcher that participates in an order flow auction platform is a solver? Because
no. I mean, it depends on the...
because you're maximizing the value that goes to the user, or you're competing on how much you pay back to the user?
No, I mean, it's on a different level, right? Like, I'm just using this as These servers are within basically the application framework. So they are partially also not operating on chain. They are basically collecting intents and then converting them into on-chain transactions.
Thank you. Well, Kubi, so your turn. There was a tweet yesterday, OH, a builder is just a searcher that grew up. Do you agree? Can you define block building and how that's different from searching?
Initially, I would say I disagree, but then again, we used to be a searcher ourselves, so a bit hypocritical. I would define a block builder as a service provider in a two-sided market where on one side you are servicing the proposer, so basically performing the difficult task of constructing blocks that are valuable and maximizing the block reward, and on the other side maximizing inclusion for the block space consumers.
Service provider.
Yes.
Whereas searchers are
maximizing value capture for themselves. And that's the sole goal.
fair. Weho, your turn. So do you see TradFi parallel to each of the three roles? Searcher, solver, builders. And do you believe that all good market makers will end up running its own block builders?
Okay, I don't think there's a perfect analogy to this, right? Because of the uniqueness in DeFi, which is why a lot of the transactions, a lot of the value itself is variable, right? Because of AMMs and other conditional transactions, right? But if I have to give a parallel, I would say that, solvers are like your OTC desk, right? They are very close to the users, right? They have a lot of flexibility in deciding what they want to do. They can be principals, they can be agents, so they're OTC desk, right? Now, searchers are like your traditional market makers, right? They see the orders coming in, right, into a pool, dark pool, bright pool, doesn't matter, right? It comes in, then they decide whether to put in their own transactions, to maximize their own, value, their own profits, right? And then I would like to think that builders, as you said, are service providers. They are just the settlement layer. Finally, when all the transactions need to be settled, right, it goes over to them. But because of the uniqueness of DeFi, the powers given to each and every of these players is actually very different from traditional finance because they can each affect the value by doing different things, right? So that would be my take, right? Now, if I were to look at it, right, would all market makers eventually become builders? Was it the question?
Will they all run their own builders?
I guess the incentive is there. It's very strong, right? Because having that vertical integration will give them a lot of advantage, right? But I would think that part of me would like to think that the competition itself would be very keen because people will see that there's a lot of value in doing this. They'll attract a lot more players in. It'll make it not economical for them to do that because if they have their own builders and they only were to consume their own transactions, they'll find that they are actually not maximizing their value by being at different parts of the supply chain.
Very cool. Well, this segues right into Tarun's question. So do you see how these three roles may evolve? Like, do you see them converging or become further specialized or something else?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe if we take a historical look, if we look at Ethereum pre-Flashbots, so 2018, 2019, you just had tons of PGAs, gas auctions, lots of spamming of the network, and you had this almost completely disaggregated system for ordering. Then you move to Flashbots bundles, and now you have this sort of kind of a little bit annoying to write down combinatorial auction where different searchers give you different bundles of different sizes. So someone who has a sandwich attack gives me a bundle of 3 transactions, but someone who's trying to win FOMO 3D will give me a bundle that's the size of a block, right? And so there's sort of this thing of I have to consider how to do this kind of bin packing problem over all the different possible package sizes, which are bundles. And then, that auction was sort of centralized because it's kind of hard to run that type of auction in a decentralized manner. So then, we kind of moved into how do we have a single item auction? And the single item auction is the block auction, right? Of, the proposer's auctioneer, the auctioneer auctions to builders. And we had this if you look at the kind of flow over time, we went from very, very unaggregated to slightly more aggregated to completely aggregated, right? Something my mom told me when I was 5, I remember vividly, is the following statement, which is capitalism is just bundling on bundling repeated many, many, many times. And so we've been in this bundle phase of the supply chain for the lifetime of Ethereum, of aggregating. And I think most of what we're seeing right now, especially in terms of people defining intents, people trying to define how to split up block building, so having different lanes within a block. So maybe the top of block would be auctioned separately from the rest of the block. Maybe there's a portion of the block that's guaranteed for private transactions only, but they have to pay a higher fee, higher base fee. This is the disaggregation step. So PBS was sort of the pinnacle of over-aggregation, and I kind of think we're seeing the roles split up, and we're entering the disaggregation phase of the supply chain. So I think these roles will actually change dramatically when that happens.
Nice, and very wise mom. Okay, so with that, I think that concludes the definition. That was quick, good. So next, let's talk a little bit about our favorite topic, intents. So why we're talking about this, I think is the first question. Why are we even talking about it? There seems to be a return of the RFQs, but they've been around for such a long time. And so why are we seeing this shift? What's different now?
Do you want?
Anyone's.
I can start. You guys can add on to it. So basically, why are we seeing this increasing attention to intents? Again, I think it's also a little overhyped at the moment, but I think it was also long overdue that more intent infrastructure would be being used, because it's just essentially a significant UX improvement that is needed. Transaction management is difficult. UX has significantly improved over the last, how many years has it been now?
It's probably since 2016, 17, right?
Yeah. So been many years in the making, and at the beginning it was quite horrendous. Now I'm not even sure how to judge it, because the longer you've been in the space, the more you get used to it. So it feels like, okay, it's very easy at the moment. But then when you get new people into the space and you observe them while they're trying to navigate simple transactions, you do realize again, oh shit, it's actually, we're still very far from where we need to be in order to get more people engaged and adopt this new technology. And I think intents are a significant step towards this future where we make it easier for new joiners to basically abstract away the complexities and navigate through DeFi and other parts of this technology. And I think it's essentially significantly improving it. It's like giving users the possibility simply to say, this is what I want to achieve, and then other parties take care of this.
I was going to ask Wei first.
Sure. So, well, I guess to me, right, I think a large part of it is due to the, good work that, Kao protocol has done, right? You have brought it actually back into, attention, right? But the way I see it, it's actually a reaction, to the novelty of DeFi, right? From DeFi summer wearing off, right? So that people started looking at, okay, there were lots of inefficiencies earlier, but because it was novel, right? They were all very happy. They were all making a lot of money, right? So they actually didn't really care. But over time, as that, the profits drops, as novelty wears off, right? People start asking a question: why am I accepting all these, inefficiencies, right? All these things that, we wouldn't have accepted in a Web2 world. When people started asking, right, why do I have to deal with, nows management, gas management? Why do I have to deal with all of these different, nuances over here that makes life so difficult? And then, people start realizing that actually it's possible, right? It's just like, in Web2 space, right? Where you pay with your Visa, we pay your MasterCard, you actually don't know what actually happens behind the scenes. It gets routed to different payment processes, goes to different banks. You don't have to deal with all these complexities, right? Then people start realizing it's actually possible, right? Intent is a way of doing it. That's why I think it's come back into focus right now.
I'm very surprised by that perspective. Because you were one of the earliest RFQ market makers, right? From way back. So are there actually more service provider, more market makers on RFQs these days? Are there more competition? Are there more, what changed from the other side?
Well, if you ask me this question at the beginning of the year, I would say that the RFQ market makers are at risk of dying out, right? A lot of them dropped off, right? But over time, in the second half of the year, I think we see an uptick. There are more people coming back to the space, right? People are getting more excited. They are seeing that the opportunity is there. So yeah, this is what's happening.
Fascinating. Sorry, Tarun.
Yeah. I actually am willing to take a very different stance than everyone else here, which is fundamentally the aggregation effect took place from Ethereum's birth because in order to actually have a sustainable proof of stake network, you actually really have to have fees that go back to the proposers. And in the earliest days of Ethereum, when it's proof of work is sort of a nice way to not have to rely on stable fee streams. Proof of stake, however, needs the fee streams to be dominating alternative yield in the same asset. Otherwise, why would you stake? Why wouldn't you just go get the alternative yield? And the kind of natural tendency to kind of aggregate yield to give to the proposers, because the proposers have this sort of temporary monopoly, is a way to make proof of stake sustainable. Virtually none of the other proof of stake chains are even close to sustainable if you compare fees and subsidies versus transaction volume. And so the aggregation effect in some ways is almost a necessary condition to bootstrap the shift from POW to POS. And I think now everyone realizes, well, we just made the proposers really rich and the users kind of didn't have a say in it. And we're sort of having the disaggregation revolution for that reason. But proof of stake, I don't think the merge would have been a successful transition had there not been all of these extra real yield for proposers. And I think now it's like, it's like collective bargaining, like the users are becoming a union and, fighting back for some of it.
Interesting. So your view is actually what's driving this, intense wave or RFQ off-chain execution has more to do with the turn of returning MEV to the users when users now unionize and they choose these off-chain venues.
Yeah, basically.
Interesting. Kubi?
Yeah, nothing to add. I would say UX. Nothing to add.
UX? Telegram bots. I remember your first answer. Well, actually, I realized we kind of dive right into intense discussion without actually answering a very important Twitter question. Are intents just limit orders? This is a question directed to Tarun.
So I think the definition of an intent that's sufficiently general to not have the mob come after you on the internet is any verifiable by all parties, multi-party verifiable conditional computation. So what that means is I have conditional computations like if Pepe goes greater than $10 on ETH mainnet, sell Pepe on Arbitrum. That involves verification on the main chain, ETH. That involves verification on Arbitrum by the sequencer. That involves verification by the fulfillment agent, so the person who's holding the risk of fulfilling that order on both chains. And that also finally requires verification from the user. So the limit order is the case where that's obvious. I set a certain price and quantity, did I get it or not? It's an indicator function. It's a very clear notion of verifiability. I think, obviously people have jumped to the farthest end of abstraction on verifiability. I think ANOMA is sort of the farthest end of like every possible thing, wanting every possible thing to be verifiable. Unfortunately, I don't think you will actually be able to get that. But fundamentally, multi-party verifiable conditional computation is really what an intent should be defined as. The simplest verifiable things are limit orders. But there could be more. I'm just not sure we know of anything that people want.
I'm going to ask every single one of you to name a non-financialized intent. Kubi, you go first.
Non-financialized.
Hey.
On Ethereum?
Okay, I can relax that constraint. It's okay to be on Solana.
Can be off the blockchain, right?
Sure, that can be a stretch, but
Buy me Taylor Swift tickets.
Is this like a common comparison? Because I was literally on a panel like 30 minutes ago, and that was exactly the use case that came up first. Is this like a popular take?
But isn't that financial still?
It is.
Like, I don't.
Shit.
I think everything I can come up with is gonna be class financialized.
So I think one that is financialized but neutral versus financialized but taking a position. So like a swap is like I'm going long an asset, short another asset, right? I'm taking a position. Is these types of crazy ZK onboarding things. Like if you were at Prague Crypto and you saw ZK P2P, which basically lets you have attestations on things like Venmo that get fulfilled by someone on chain who then gives you stable coins or ETH. That onboarding fulfillment type of thing is like not quite, it's still financial, like it involves dollars or ETH on both sides, but it's neutral. It's like, it's not trying to like be long one asset and short another.
One example I can think of, right, probably would be, conditional voting. Conditional voting, right? So for example, saying that, okay, cast my vote for this proposal on this particular DAO only if, let's say, another proposal passes on another DAO, right? That could be a kind of intent.
good one. All right, well, then, okay, so now we have, seems to be this rising trend, whether it's market chosen or it's some other forces, intends becoming popular. So how would that, do we think that it will have an oligopoly like block building? And if so, will it be worse?
I think, it's probably going to be like block building, because I think in the long term, the most sophisticated solvers, at least for the use cases related to trading, are going to be market makers. And so it's going to follow a similar trajectory, I think.
Yes, I think likely going to happen, right? Unless obviously there are more players entering the space and further increasing the competition. Otherwise, we are going to end up with an oligopoly situation.
Yeah, I think there will be specializations, for like specific order types that don't happen so frequently. So it's maybe not necessarily worthwhile for our solvers to like be able to support these use cases. So there will be in that sense, like not an oligarchy of like maybe just 5 players, but I think it will be a little bit more decentralized. But yeah, for sure, like usually to remain competitive in the game, you need this more and more higher degree of sophistication and potentially private liquidity, that there's definitely going to be some sort of reduced market share. There are thoughts about potentially creating also baseline solvers by basically providing simply a continuity reward that incentivizes the community to also participate in the competition, just to ensure that if for whatever reason there is some sort of monopoly of solvers try to how do you say, like to merge the approaches, to have like still like some sort of security backup to this. But of course, they won't be nearly as profitable as the more sophisticated ones.
Yeah, I think there is oligopoly, although I think permissionless oligopoly can sometimes look quite different. And again, I think the PBS is more strongly oligopolistic. You're really only bidding on one thing repeatedly versus having to do many fulfillments. And there's kind of this trade-off of like, how specialized can you be at one thing versus like having to do many things. And if there's enough disaggregation at the intent side in terms of like different types of markets, then there's some point at which it should be less, at least on a relative basis, less oligopolistic than PBS. But it still obviously will concentrate relative to market size.
So this now brings an interesting point. Remember when we were asking earlier that will market makers inevitably all run their own block builders? And it seems to be generally yes, it makes sense. So we have, an oligopolistic market with the solvers, and they also run builders. So what would that entail for the block building market? Like, who is, are the lines just being blurred, or are solvers eating builders' cake? Or even more, hot take, will builders just end up doing the routine sex-arb and some transfer and call it a day, whereas most of the work is being done by those solvers?
So I think both larger other block builders, so our main competitors, are large market makers, some more than others. And both of them are quite competitive already when it comes to solving. And more of the solutions are going to be provided from internal liquidity versus on-chain routing. Is mostly going to be the long tail assets. And so there's already like a very synergetic setup as is. So, and in general, the more the builder market matures, the higher the barrier to entry. And so you have these entities that are competitive at building blocks that are already market makers and already solvers. So I think that is more the problem. And then the last thing is, even when it comes to on-chain routing, the block builder is basically the only actor that really has access to state at the time of execution. So they are theoretically only the only party that can actually provide an optimal solution. So then you have another edge layered on top of that. So yeah, it doesn't look great. That being said, this is kind of where we come in, and we are trying to be the credible, neutral builder in the space and try and commoditize some of the edge that the vertically integrated parties have. And so we are doing that currently for the CXDEX trade, and we have some ideas how we could potentially do that for solving as well. But it is harder to do because we need to interface with an external party. But on the other hand, we have the edge of being able to focus on the infrastructure and not having to do too many things at once and be more specialized. So I think that's the dynamic, yeah.
Well, I mean, the one reason why, right, private liquidity is going to be more efficient than, AMMs is simply because AMMs have to do a calculation plus a transfer, while private liquidity just do a transfer, right? So it's going to be more gas efficient anyway, right? So I think there's a natural advantage over there, right? But, private liquidity can't do everything an AMM does because they don't have inventory over all the gazillion assets that exist, right? So I think there's a space for AMM, right? But it's just that, yes, private market makers will have a significant advantage, right? And yeah, I mean, they're just making good use of this advantage when they actually go on to building. And then when they do solving, yep, they can tap on this advantage. So it's definitely something that happen.
I mean, that this is the case, you can already see on Uniswap X today, right? Like, if you try, like, basically the UI switches between the Uniswap X and normal AMM mode, depending on what orders you type in. And then on, like, the top 10, whatever, trading pairs, it would show you, it would usually route it via Uniswap X because there's market maker integrations. And then for all the long tail tokens, it would still take you to the AMM. So that's 100% the case. Maybe to the other point, I think there can also be really user benefits for if there's more collaboration between solvers and block builders, because essentially by the more access you have or the more control you have over the overall supply chain, you can also take that at the advantage of, like, for your own within the solver ecosystem, within that auction, right? Because if you, for example, execute a transaction and you know, okay, you have now access to all transactions that are in the public mempool. You could place transactions that are improving the prices for your users before the transactions that, as part of the solver competition, you need to execute. You would already know, or potentially, actually that's the point that we talked about earlier, you wouldn't know what the next price point would be at this stage yet, but you would only know at the very end of the block. But still at that point you would know. And you would know what types of, like, other transactions you could also use to background transactions. And you could use all this to improve your price point that you're providing in the solver competition. So it could be used at the advantage to the users of that application.
I think maybe the layer one portion is kind of moot. That we've kind of already reached sort of where the aggregation will be in terms of users. But I think layer two is going to be kind of interesting if there are really decentralized sequencers or shared sequencers. Shared sequencers sort of offer you kind of crappy guarantees in some ways, right? They can only really offer atomic inclusion. I think, like, with some extra effort, you can get, partial sequences. I'm looking at Josh right as I'm saying this because I want to see his face in horror as I say that. But I think you can only fully really guarantee atomic inclusion. The real question, I think, becomes, will solvers who have to do, if a world exists where there's more multi-domain value to capture versus the centralized, decentralized arbitrage. Now, I'm not saying we're anywhere near that world, but if that were true, I actually could see there being less integration over time due to having to interface with all of these different components that you have a carrying cost to, and you'll specialize into some subsets.
Perfect segue to the question for on specialization. So it seems that the builder or the market maker can do it all. But clearly, I guess statistically, I think market makers have been very selective in terms of what venues they trade on and also, like, what kind of risk they take. And so there is, what is there left for specialization? Or under what condition would essentially specialized solvers or searchers thrive?
Well, for example, today, right, when we look at solvers, right, they're actually mainly swap solvers, right, because they're actually looking at just swaps, right? So there is already a specialization, right? So potentially, if let's say we get to more generalized kinds of intents, right, there could be, for example, specialists that comes for, let's say, lending protocols, right? The swap solvers probably won't be able to do that, right? But even within the swap solving space, right, different solvers will have, for example, different kinds of specialization, because some would, for example, be very good at, let's say, stable coins. Some would be very good at, let's say, majors. Some would, for example, choose to, do certain, long tail assets because they, for example, have, let's say, access to an inventory, right? Or they could, price the risk better. So I think there is room for specialization.
I think if we have any of these roll-ups that do non-financial-ish, yeah, I added the weasel postfix there. Like gaming kind of things, like if there really are gaming roll-ups that get usage, I think you will see a lot of weird MEV that you don't expect. Just like WoW Gold hunters, you're just going to find the equivalent of WoW Gold on chain, and that will be something that I bet you the swappers will not be able to do.
So both of those conditions entails essentially more applications, actually, and more activities. That is not what we see today. So maybe one question here is that if we assume the current, the market condition does not change, but rather is there a world where instead of a builder or a market maker does it all, there can be a world where specialized actors can band together, can coordinate, and outcompete the integrated builder-solver, builder-searchers.
I think it's gonna resemble more the current landscape of if you think about the different MEV strategies, and like we talk about these other apps and ecosystems, but the majority of, let's say, the volumes or the value is going to be in a specific market. And so currently that's the Uniswap Binance trade, which is 60% of all MEV or CXDEX ARP. And so even though there might be more long tail opportunities and a diverse set of solvers that are very specialized, you still have the big boys sort of, capturing the majority of the pie. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's actually more strategy driven, right? So it says how often do these opportunities arises, right? So if you're just looking at, let's say, sex arbitrage, right, it happens fairly often, right? Versus someone who actually specializes in something, let's say liquidation, versus someone who, let's say, specialize, in something that's more, long tail, some distress, kind of, let's say, bridge hacks and such, right? They will have advantage because the big boys also, as speak, right? They are not focusing on this, right? They have no specialization in this. They have no idea what to do, right? But the opportunities just don't arise. So that's why you see more and more of, it's just the same bunch of people. That's why they are seeing more opportunities, because it's just happening more often.
I think we're almost at time. Well, we have 2 minutes. What I'm going to ask the panelists to pick someone on this panel and ask them a spicy question.
That's a cop-out.
Exactly.
Making us work.
Taking a break.
Do you think solvers that are currently not major market makers will have a chance at all to exist?
Yes, I think they will have an opportunity, right? Because I think currently, if we actually dive deep into what the solvers are doing, right, it's actually very simplistic. There's a lot of different things that can actually be done, right? They actually not, just put it, they are just scratching the surface. There's a lot more, liquidity sources, a lot more, ways of, generating extra, value out of the system that I think hasn't been touched. So I think we are still having quite a lot of room for them to survive. My question for Anna, right? Okay, what do you think about, the competition from 1inch and Uniswap?
That's good. It's interesting. I would say to some extent, it makes now Uniswap volume more comparable. We usually compare CowSwap volume with DEX aggregated volume. So we compared it with 1inch, Paraswap, Matcha, because the majority of volume on an AMM is usually arbitrage volume. And it's estimated at 80%. So that puts Uniswap obviously right on top of all existing DEX volume. And now, if you only compare intent-based trading volume, their market share shrinks significantly in comparison. So in a way, it's like improving the competition game. And in general, I think it's a good also to see that they adopt intent-based system. I see it also as a showcasing or signal that we are moving in the right direction. And again, like I think it's a needed UX change in order to bring all of us to the next level. And ultimately, we shouldn't be competing on the little market share that we have today, but we should think about the market share where we want to be in 10 years from now.
Anna, your turn.
Thinking about the spicy question. Does anyone from the audience have one?
Wow, we're really just outsourcing labor. No,
This is MEV.
If Uniswap or MetaMask or anyone else who's like moving into an intent-based system was considering to strike a private deal with a block builder of like, hey, I will only collaborate together with you, not Titan specific, any block builder, in order to basically, if you have high market share, as if you would consider all Uniswap transactions from today would be going into would be only forwarded to a single block builder, would obviously significantly boost their market share and their probability to be the one being responsible for the next block. Do you think block builders would be like trying to strike such a deal, or do you think block builders are like in itself ethical enough to believe that the competition is needed in order to not try to pursue such a deal?
Yeah, I think there's probably not a block builder who would not try to make the deal. Like if Uniswap came knocking and said, hey, I want to give you all our order flow, I probably wouldn't say no. I think it's more a question of the UX basically. So if you even had 70% of block space, there's still like 30% of the blocks that you want to get into. So you kind of don't want to send it exclusively. There's some things you can do around exclusivity for specific slots, given certain confidence levels and things. But yeah, I wouldn't say no. And the question is like ethical from what perspective?
Well, I would say, I mean, at least you're honest. Ethical probably from the perspective of when is the system failing at what degree of centralization? That leaves us to Tarun.
Who will have their margins compressed to zero first, builders or intent solvers? Anyone can answer this.
I would say intent solvers. Naturally. I think even currently, like looking at most of the dashboards, intent solvers are net negative. I don't know about you guys specifically, but there are a lot of subsidies and stuff going on already. I think from a perspective of just generating revenue from a share of the block reward, that is certainly going to trend towards zero, but there's a lot more a builder can generate revenue from.
Yeah, I have to agree, right? I think it's more in terms of the moat that they build up, right? So it's easier to become a solver than to become a block builder, right? At least a competitive one in this space, right? So I do know, right? I do hear about a lot of the solvers, right? They are taking a loss, right? Well, luckily for us, we have always been profitable, so I think we are fine.
Amazing. Well, I get to ask one last question, but this is also to actually anyone. Builders at this stage still competes pretty much solely on order flow. So do you see that at some point down the road, the tech matters, like merging algorithm, etc., or never?
I think it already does. and it does in the cases where you have order flow parity. So their latency and merging matters a lot. And given you have like 3 larger or 4 larger block builders, and that is just based on order flow, but amongst them it's in a lot of cases actually related to latency and merging, but order flow is still king. So it is not black or white, if that makes sense.
Well, 1 year down the road, rank top 3 things that matters to win for block builder.
Order flow. Latency, merging.
Stay the same. What about 5 years down the road?
Probably the same. I don't think there's much going to change structurally in terms of order flow. And if you can't guarantee parity, then that's always going to matter.
Well, we can work on that. Great. Thank you so much for a great panel and everyone for staying over a little bit over time. And we'll be, I think, happy hour or something.
I'll close, don't worry. Thank you.
Perfect.